I'm Tom Parks. I work in the sustainability team in Camden Council, where our remit is to set strategy and policy for carbon emissions in the borough, but also for air quality. So our statutory obligations for air quality management in Camden fall down to our team. And my role specifically is to manage our air quality monitoring and data analysis, and then how that feeds into the policy and the strategy we set to improve air quality in Camden. So firstly, I'll talk about the current situation for air quality in Camden. As you can see from the map there, much of the borough is in breach of the legal limits for NO2, as is much of inner and central London. That means that Camden is an air quality management area, and we have statutory obligations to produce air quality management plans and action plans to try and set out measures and interventions to try and bring air quality in Camden into compliance with national limits. As we've heard already, the public is a lot more engaged and a lot more aware of the problems associated with poor air quality now. This was evident during the Camden 2025 process that we had last year, which was a citizens' assembly of people who live in and work in Camden, where they outlined key themes that they felt were important in sort of an aspirational Camden in 2025. And air quality is one of those key themes. So people want to live in and work in a borough where they feel that the air they breathe isn't having a detrimental impact on their health. And in January last year, we became the first London authority to formally adopt the World Health Organization guideline limits for air quality as our official air quality targets. So this new Clean Air Action Plan that we've just finished producing is the first of three, which is going to take us up to 2030 with the overarching ambition of delivering compliance with the WHO targets by 2030. So this plan, the process for producing the action plan is a lot more evidence-based than we previously adopted in Camden. We've heard about the now much more fully established health links with air quality. So everything we did with the action plan is focused on health, the health implications of poor air quality. So this is a lot more robust in its approach than previous action plans. We're looking at both exposure and emissions, so the experience of people living in and working in Camden, but also the emission sources. We've considered past projects that we've run in Camden, whether they've been successful or they've not been as successful as they perhaps could have been. And we're looking in a lot more detail at what our air quality data shows us. So the data that we get from within Camden, but also the data from other areas in London, and also from modelling exercises undertaken in Camden and also the wider environment. So in terms of data and data collection, we have a network of fairly rudimentary diffusion tubes which measure NO2. As of December 2017, we had 14 diffusion tube monitoring sites in Camden, which, as you can see, gives a very not a very comprehensive monitoring network. There's lots of gaps in there, so we didn't really have a full picture of the distribution of NO2 throughout the borough. Moving on to January this year, we have much better coverage of data for NO2 now. So these are all monitoring projects that we undertake as a council, but then when you factor in external parties who are doing their own monitoring, we have considerably more data available to us now to fully assess the distribution of pollution within the borough. So there's air quality monitoring from HS2 and from TfL in there as well. As well as diffusion tubes, we have much more sophisticated electrochemical sensors for NO2 and particulate matter as well. So this is one of our automatic monitoring stations. This is on Euston Road. These sites provide much more granular data to a much higher degree of accuracy and precision than we get with diffusion tubes. The data is ratified and validated by third parties, and it's published online, so we know that it's fully reliable in assessing air quality and then for designing projects as well. And we have now 5 of these monitoring sites in the borough with intentions to try and put more in as well, so that we have a better distribution in the north of the borough. And as well as our own monitoring network, we have some of these AQ mesh pods, which are part of the Breathe London project, which is a C40 Cities initiative. So we have 5 of these in Camden as well, looking at air quality in sensitive locations. So we have some outside schools and where people tend to spend a lot of time. So the purpose of this was to fill in gaps in the existing monitoring network. So we know where pollution is distributed throughout the borough, but it's also important to know where it comes from. So specific to Camden, this is London atmospheric emissions inventory data for NO2. So we can see that half of NO2 emissions in Camden come from road transport, 30% comes from gas heating systems in domestic and commercial buildings, and 10% comes from construction machinery. For PM2.5, it's similar for road transport, so half PM2.5 emissions in Camden coming from road transport, a larger proportion, 20% coming from construction machinery, and only 10% from building emissions. But still, the key kind of 3 main contributors making up the bulk of emissions for both NO2 and particulates on there. But just knowing that the borough average source apportionment for pollution doesn't really help all that much. So last year we commissioned a modelling study to look at how geographically that source apportionment varies. So it essentially allows us to explore how the relative contribution of different sources will change and allows us to prioritise and focus our measures. So this, for example, is showing the concentration of PM10 from gas heating systems. So you can see it's comparatively having more of an impact in central London and also some areas in Gospel Oak and the north of the borough. But all this information is useful for knowing what the problem is. We know what the health implications of poor air quality are, but if we don't have a way of taking action to actually improve air quality, then it doesn't really mean that much. So we knew from the outset that this new Clean Air Action Plan had to be a lot more engaged and collaborative than any we'd previously produced. So from the outset, we formed a Camden Clean Air Partnership, bringing in people in the community, but also some of the key emitters in the boroughs, so people from businesses and sectors who are active in or based in Camden. And that, with the partnership, we designed some of the draft measures, which ultimately went into the Clean Air Action Plan. We produced a commonplace website where we could extend our reach and we could get feedback and comments on those draft measures from people elsewhere in the community. And we ran a full consultation on the draft Clean Air Action Plan and held events for that, so we could get more feedback and could understand what people thought and what they wanted to see added into the action plan. We worked with other networks that we run as well, so the Camden Climate Change Alliance and schools that we work with. The whole ambition of this being to sort of understand people's anecdotal and qualitative experience of air quality in Camden, because we have numbers from a few sites, but we need to know what people's views on it are. We also wanted to understand the perceptions of the businesses and sectors, because they have a big impact on air quality, both positive and negative. So they potentially have the impact of having a huge, being able to introduce measures which improve air quality where they are active. And it made sense to bring everyone together, all key stakeholders in Camden, because ultimately we all have the same overarching ambition. We are cohesive in those ambitions. And having this partnership and this engaged approach allows us to share the responsibility and the leadership for taking action on air quality among all stakeholders. So it's not just the council producing an action plan and then doing it. It's the council doing its own projects, but also enabling and empowering other people to make their own changes as well, and to share the success and to learn from each other. So this really was a new model for collaborative and participative action in Camden, and we're going to explore how it develops over the next few months as this action plan is launched, and then for the subsequent 2 action plans. And then finally, the key priorities which came out of the action plan process. The 7 main strands that we're focusing on are reducing construction emissions, so enforcing regulations for construction machinery, working with communities so that they know what to look out for, and providing mechanisms for communities and residents to tell us when they think construction sites aren't complying with what they should be doing. Reducing building emissions, so using our work with the planning teams in Camden to to try and enforce air quality, neutral air quality positive development, and to promote energy efficiency, so that we are trying to minimise and ultimately remove combustion heating in new developments in the borough. Reducing transport emissions, so we work really closely in our team with transport strategy in Camden, so try and accelerate the adoption of ultra-low emission vehicles and low emission vehicles. We try and support communities and schools to undertake their own projects on air quality in the borough. We work with businesses and other organisations and business improvement districts to try and reduce the emissions from freight and servicing and deliveries, because everybody's getting deliveries to businesses, to their homes now. So we're trying to promote consolidation of deliveries and continuing to raise public awareness about the health implications of poor air quality. And finally, and possibly the most crucial point here, really, drawing on what everyone else has said, is that we really have to have a defined and strong lobbying voice here, because we're increasingly becoming aware that as time goes on, a greater proportion of pollution in Camden is going to be coming from outside of our borough. So we're expecting that by 2030, potentially 3/4 of pollution in Camden is going to be from outside of our direct control. So having this engaged approach with the community, with businesses in the borough, gives us a much greater leverage to have a kind of a unified lobbying voice, so we can put pressure at regional and sort of national scale to try and make the changes in terms of policy and funding that we need to make a difference on air quality in Camden. So that's it from me.